My wife and I love to camp out. Whatever we've ever done, whether it's four-wheeling or boating or flying, we always try a way to utilize our vehicles and camp out. And we have this wonderful little airplane now that we sleep in the back of. And I was on a board for the State Department of Aeronautics trying to find some airplane campgrounds, places to use as airplane campgrounds. And they were interested in working with the state of New Mexico. So we found this beautiful field at 6,000 feet elevation in a place called Reserve, New Mexico, surrounded by tall pine trees. And my wife and I decided, let's fly over here and camp out for the night, see what it's like. Maybe we can get this thing open to some kind of an airplane campground. And we flew into this field. There was nobody there. There were no airplanes. There's no cell phone service, no phone anywhere, no way to call for help. And we set up a little tent on the side of our plane, and we had a wonderful time camping out there. And at 3:30 in the morning, in dead quiet, I hear this horrible crash and grinding metal. And my first thought was that a plane had come in and crashed on the runway. And I heard this huge engine vibrating, and it shook the plane. And my wife woke up. She said, "What's that?" And I looked out the window, because we're in the back there. We take the seats out. And there's this huge truck, one of these jacked up trucks that has crashed through the airport fence, and it had chain link wrapped around it. And I heard drunken laughter, these three men in there, and I knew 3:30 in the morning, we're in trouble. And then one of them, as the engine shuts down, he says, "There's a plane, let's take it for a ride." And I tell people to this day, with all the scary experiences we have had, that's the closest I ever felt to thinking that we were about ready to be killed. I was thinking of the Tyson escape. Remember Gary Tyson and Randy Greenawalt? They escaped and they killed anybody that came along. And my first thought was, these guys are escaped convicts. They want a plane. They can get to Mexico in an hour. And we got the only plane on the field. And the keys are right there in the ignition. We're in a mosquito netting, if I can describe this a little bit, a mosquito netting that covers us so I can't reach out. We're, inside this thing. And before we even know it, this guy is on the wing and into the front of the cockpit. And they don't know we're there. There's three of these guys out there. And I finally said, "What are you doing?" And he looks back through the mosquito netting and he says, "How many of you are back there?" And I said, "Well, I'm not alone." And as a former Marine, I'm almost ashamed to admit this, but I had a gun next to me, but it wasn't loaded because I just didn't think anything would happen this fast. And it's the biggest mistake I made. So as I'm talking to this guy, I'm trying to feed a clip in to the weapon. And then I knew I had to pull the bolt back to chamber a shell. And all that's very noisy. I said to him, he said, "Take us for a ride." I said, "Well, I can't take you for a ride. There's no lights on the runway." He said, "That's no problem. We'll put the truck at the end and you can aim for the headlights." And it seemed to me these were desperate people. And I said, "Well, I can't fly because I had a margarita last night. You can't fly for 8 hours." He says, "Well, we want to go for a plane ride." And the other two guys are shaking the wing. Meanwhile, my wife is in the back. There's a little rear door. She's dug a pistol out of her survival pack, and she's there with just ready to fire if they open that back door. And anyways, I'm talking to this guy, trying to persuade him not to, why I can't take him for a ride. I'm feeding the clip up, and I think I chambered a shell. And he gets out to go around the other way, and I fired a shot through the window because I didn't know whether that bolt was the shell was ready to go. So once you have a shell fired, then you know you're good to go. So I got out of the plane. I remember I was in my underwear. I had this gun, which happened to be an Uzi. 32. I knew I had 31 rounds left. It wasn't an automatic, semi-automatic, but pretty awesome looking weapon. And I tell people who think that assault weapons should not be sold to regular citizens because they're going to be because they're just used by criminals in a crime. The Uzi saved our life because it was so scary looking. So these guys started to back off, but they wouldn't leave. And I finally told them, to make a long story short, "If you guys come back in the morning, I'll take you for a ride." And he says, "No, we're going to Wyoming." And they piled into the truck, but as they left, they started shooting over our heads with a weapon. And I ran out to the street to make sure they were leaving, and they killed the lights and pulled over 100 feet away. Well, I knew they were going to come back and just shoot through the plane, take our plane. And so what we had to do was call an emergency call real quick. I got on my handheld, 121.5, which is the emergency frequency, called for a mayday, hijacking on the ground with shots fired. Nobody answered. My wife said, let's go use the plane radio. It's got more power. I turned on the plane, electrical, used that again. Nobody out there. We're in the middle of what they call a MOA, military operating area. Airliners don't fly over these things. So then I got a chart that is used by the airlines. It's for IFR flying, and I called the nearest frequency that they might be on. And I got an America West pilot. His name was Lance Thompson, because I interviewed him later for an article for Private Pilot magazine. I got this pilot on, middle of the night, America West flight from Vegas to Austin, Texas. And I said, we need help real bad. We got 3 guys coming back here. They've tried to steal our plane. Their shots have been fired. Here's where we are. He issued a Mayday call to the New Mexico Department of Public Safety. They relayed it around, and no help was ever sent. There were 3 investigations by the state of New Mexico, by the governor's office, by Catron County, by Socorro, where their headquarters is, and they figured out that the emergency call went all the way around to a dispatcher 7 miles down the road. She took the call, hijacking at the airport, shots fired, and she went to sleep. And so my wife and I were forced to stay out in the grass all night long, and these guys did come back, looked all around the plane. We had it locked up. They couldn't get in. And finally, in the morning, we were so tired, we went back in the plane, collapsed, and then they show up for their ride. They actually came back to take the ride, I promised them. And I said, well, you know what? I said, I've checked my fuel. I don't have enough fuel now to take you for a ride and get back to Phoenix. Oh, that's okay. We'll go down to town and get you some fuel. No, I need a certain kind of fuel that's higher octane. So arguing over and over with these guys. And finally, when they left again, I had a portable bicycle I put together. I biked out to the nearest store 3 miles away, called 911. The New Mexico State Police showed up, and they caught him on top of a ridge, asleep. Passed out probably, and I went down and identified him in jail. Now the moral of the story is I had Herbert Hawkins, who used to be the director of the FBI, came up to me one time at Scottsdale Airport, and he said, hey, I heard about that amazing case. He said, you know what, you were legally justified to kill all 3 of those guys. He said, the hijacking law makes no distinction between a 747 at LAX and a little teeny plane in a pasture. If somebody tries to take it, potential of a death penalty, if they're tried and convicted. And he said, you could have legally killed all 3. He says, why didn't you? Why didn't you just blow them away? And I told him, because they never said, give me the plane. They always said, take us for a ride. And they were on a thin razor edge that they never crossed. They always said, take us for a ride. They never grabbed for me. They never tried to steal the plane. They were respecting me as the owner of the plane. And that's why all of us had been young and done crazy things before, and I knew there were just some drunk kids celebrating the rodeo up in Springerville. And so I was ready to do it, but I didn't do it. So it was an interesting example of self-control. So that's why